The arena was electric, 19,596 fans on their feet, confetti falling like golden snow, and the Cleveland Cavaliers had just done the impossible. 52 years of heartbreak had finally ended in the most dramatic Game 7 in NBA history. The sound was deafening, grown men crying, children screaming with joy, entire families embracing as if they had just witnessed a miracle. But as LeBron James held that finals trophy above his head, his sweat-soaked jersey clinging to his exhausted body, his eyes weren't on the celebration, they weren't on his teammates dancing around him, they weren't on the ESPN cameras broadcasting this moment to millions around the world. They were locked on a small boy in section 127, tears streaming down his face. But these weren't tears of joy. The child was 8 years old, wearing a Cavaliers jersey 3 sizes too big, sitting alone in a sea of celebration. While everyone around him jumped and cheered, he sat perfectly still, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Something about that image, that lone figure of pain in an ocean of triumph, hit LeBron like a physical blow to the chest. What LeBron did next would haunt him for months, and change the trajectory of his entire life. June 19, 2016, Game 7, Oracle Arena, 10:47 p.m. LeBron James had just delivered on the most impossible promise in sports history. "Cleveland, this is for you," he had screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with raw emotion, sweat and tears mixing on his face as he clutched that gold trophy like it contained his entire soul. 52 years. 52 years of Cleveland heartbreak, the drive, the shot, the decision's aftermath, and he had finally, impossibly, brought a championship home. The weight of an entire city's dreams had been crushing his shoulders for months. Every day leading up to this series, he could feel it, walking through Cleveland streets and seeing the desperate hope in people's eyes. Kids wearing his jersey like armor, elderly fans who had been waiting their entire lives for this moment. The pressure was suffocating, but he had carried it. He had delivered. But champions aren't supposed to break. As cameras followed him through the tunnel, capturing every triumphant moment for posterity, nobody saw what happened when those lights dimmed to emergency lighting. Nobody saw his hands shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline wore off. Nobody saw him lean against the cold concrete wall, breathing hard, feeling like the weight of the world was somehow heavier now that he had successfully carried it. Nobody heard the phone call he made at 3:47 a.m. that morning, sitting alone in his hotel room while Cleveland celebrated in the streets below. But that crying child in the stands had seen something in LeBron's eyes that night. Something raw and vulnerable that would connect them forever. The boy's name was Marcus Williams, 8 years old, no father, living in his third foster home in 2 years. Just like LeBron had been at that age, fatherless, uncertain, carrying wounds that basketball couldn't heal. But wait, you haven't heard the most shocking part yet. Marcus Williams wasn't crying because Cleveland won. He wasn't crying from joy or excitement, or the overwhelming energy of 19,596 people losing their minds around him. No, Marcus was crying because 6 months ago his father had made him a promise that felt as real and solid as the concrete under his feet. "If the Cavs make it to Game 7, son, I'll take you. We'll watch history together." His father had promised a lot of things over the years. He promised he'd pick Marcus up from school on Fridays. He promised they'd go to the movies on weekends. He promised he'd be at Marcus's Little League games. He promised he'd never leave like his own father had left him. But promises, Marcus had learned through 8 years of painful experience, were just words that adults used before they disappeared. The ticket to Game 7, the most expensive ticket Marcus had ever seen, had been purchased with money Marcus saved from his lunch allowance over 6 months. $67.35, counted and recounted in a mason jar hidden under his bed. His foster mum, Mrs. Johnson, had driven him to the game because she couldn't bear to see him miss this moment, even though his father was nowhere to be found. When LeBron spotted him during those final seconds, victory secured, confetti falling, his teammates already celebrating, something electric happened. Later, Oracle Arena's security footage would show LeBron James, in the middle of the biggest moment of his professional life, actually stopping mid-celebration, his championship smile fading as he locked eyes with this one child among thousands. In that moment, 2 fatherless boys, 131, 18, shared something that transcended basketball, transcended the noise, transcended everything except the recognition of pain that never fully heals. What happened next in the locker room would break LeBron James and rebuild him into something entirely different. The celebration was raging in the visitors' locker room. Champagne spraying everywhere, creating puddles on the concrete floor. Teammates dancing to music blasting from someone's phone. Media members pushing microphones and cameras into faces flushed with victory. The smell of sweat, champagne and pure elation filled the air. But LeBron, he was sitting alone in his locker, still in his sweat-soaked uniform, staring at his iPhone with a blank expression that his teammates would later describe as haunted. The noise around him seemed muffled, distant, like he was underwater. The text message was simple, sent from a number he didn't recognize. "You kept your promise to Cleveland. My dad didn't keep his promise to me. I'm proud of you anyway. Marcus Williams." Section 127, Row J, Seat 1 How did an 8-year-old even get his number? And why did reading those words feel like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart? LeBron read the message 17 times. Each time, the weight in his stomach grew heavier. Each time, he could see that boy's face more clearly, the way he had been crying while everyone around him celebrated, the way he had been so perfectly, heartbreakingly alone in that moment of collective joy. The answer to that question will shock you, but first you need to understand what was really happening inside LeBron's mind. Cleveland was celebrating, but inside the Ritz-Carlton, room 284-7, LeBron James was falling apart. "I can't be what everyone needs me to be," he whispered to his wife Savannah at 4:15 a.m. The weight of carrying an entire city's hopes had been crushing, but now he realized he was carrying something heavier. He was carrying the hopes of every fatherless child who saw him as more than just a basketball player. Marcus's text message had broken something open inside him. Every interview where he talked about being a father figure, every time he'd said, "I want to be the dad I never had," it all felt empty when faced with one child's simple truth. His father had abandoned him when he was Marcus's age. And here was Marcus, abandoned too, reaching out to the one person who might understand. The crying didn't start immediately. First came the shaking, then the shortness of breath. Then, at 4:23 a.m., surrounded by championship trophies and accolades, LeBron James, the king, cried like he hadn't cried since he was 8 years old. But this breakdown, it was just the beginning. What LeBron discovered about Marcus the next day would change everything. June 20th, the day after, LeBron's assistant handed him a folder. "You asked me to find out about the boy from Section 127. Inside was heartbreaking. Marcus Williams, age 8, in foster care for 3 years. Father left when he was 5. Mother struggling with addiction. The Game 7 ticket. Marcus had saved lunch money for 6 months. But here's what the folder didn't say. When LeBron drove to Marcus's foster home that Tuesday morning, unannounced, he discovered something that would change everything. Marcus had covered his bedroom wall with newspaper clippings. But not of LeBron's basketball achievements. Every single clipping was about LeBron's community work, his foundation, his promises to kids. "I knew you'd understand," Marcus said when he saw LeBron. "You know what it's like when your dad doesn't come home. But you came back to Cleveland. You keep your promises." That's when LeBron James realized he hadn't just won a championship. He had inherited a responsibility that would define the rest of his life. The conversation that happened next, nobody was prepared for this. Not LeBron, not Marcus, not anyone. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" LeBron asked Marcus as they sat on the foster home's front steps. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then answered with startling clarity. "I want to be a dad who keeps his promises, a dad who doesn't leave when things get scary." The simplicity of it hit LeBron like a physical blow. Here was everything he'd been trying to articulate for years, distilled into one sentence by an 8-year-old who understood loss in ways championships could never heal. That's when LeBron made a promise. Not to cameras, not to Cleveland, to Marcus. "I'm going to show you what it means to be that kind of dad," he said. "But you have to promise me something too. When you become that dad someday, you'll show someone else." Marcus nodded seriously, but then he asked the question that would keep LeBron awake for months. "What if I'm not good enough to be someone's dad? What if I mess up like mine did?" LeBron's answer to that question, it would become the most important words he ever spoke. But first, you need to understand the weight he was carrying. The weeks following the championship should have been the happiest of LeBron's career. Instead, they became the hardest. Marcus's question echoed, "What if I'm not good enough?" Every day, hundreds of kids reached out to him, kids without fathers, kids who saw him not as a basketball player, but as proof that fatherless boys could succeed. The pressure was suffocating. How do you be a father to millions when you never had one yourself? At 2:17 a.m. on July 3, 2016, LeBron made a phone call that would change everything. He called Marcus. "Are you okay with me learning how to be better at this father thing, with you?" LeBron asked. Marcus was quiet. "Then you mean like practice?" "Yeah, kid, like practice. I've never been a dad to someone who wasn't my own son. Maybe we can both learn what it looks like when adults keep their promises." "LeBron?" Marcus finally said. "When my real dad left, he said being a dad was too hard. Are you sure you won't think it's too hard too?" "Marcus," LeBron said, "I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise you this, I will not leave, even when it's hard. That's what practice means. You keep showing up until you get better. Promise, I promise." What happened during their first practice session 3 days later, nobody could have predicted this. July 6, 2016, Akron, Ohio, 10 a.m. LeBron picked up Marcus for what they both called their first dad practice in his personal car, not the team-provided SUV with tinted windows, not the Lamborghini that sat in his garage, but his regular black Chevy Tahoe that he used for normal errands. The plan was simple: spend the day like a normal father and son would. No cameras, No publicity team, no social media posts, just two people figuring out how to fill the spaces their absent fathers had left behind. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, wearing his best clothes, khaki pants, and a polo shirt that Mrs. Johnson had clearly made sure was perfectly ironed. He was carrying a small backpack with snacks she had packed, and he buckled his seatbelt with the careful precision of a child who had learned not to take safety for granted. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked as they pulled away from the foster home. "I don't know," LeBron admitted, and then realized how that might sound to a kid whose life had been full of adults who didn't have plans. "I mean, I know some places we could go, but I thought maybe you could pick. What do normal dads and kids do together?" Marcus thought about this seriously, staring out the window at Akron neighborhoods that LeBron knew intimately. These were the streets where he had grown up, where he had learned to navigate the world without a father's guidance. "Could we go to a park?" Marcus finally asked. "And maybe throw a football? My foster dad is nice," he added quickly, "but he's got 4 other kids and 2 jobs, so we don't really get to do stuff like that." They ended up at Memorial Park, the same park where LeBron had played as a kid when he needed to escape whatever chaos was happening at home. They threw a football back and forth on the grass, Marcus's small hands barely able to grip the ball properly, but his determination absolute. After an hour of throwing, they sat on the swings, 2 figures who looked mismatched to anyone passing by, but who understood each other in ways that had nothing to do with age or fame or circumstances. "My foster dad is nice," Marcus repeated, pushing himself gently back and forth on the swing, "but he doesn't have time to just be with me, you know, like really be present. He's always thinking about the other kids or work or bills or something." LeBron felt something click into place in his mind, like a puzzle piece he hadn't known he was missing. "Marcus," he said slowly, "what if we made sure every kid had someone who had time, not just to throw a football or buy ice cream, but to really be present, to really listen, to really see them?" The idea was forming as he spoke, taking shape in ways he couldn't have imagined just days before. Not just charity or donations or basketball camps, but something deeper, something that addressed the real problem: kids who felt invisible, unheard, like their lives didn't matter enough for adults to truly invest in them. That conversation on those swings would eventually become the I Promise School. But in that moment, it was just 2 people realizing they could heal together. Marcus stopped swinging and looked at him with that serious 8-year-old expression that always caught LeBron off guard. "Would you really do that? For other kids like us?" "We would do that," LeBron corrected him, the certainty in his voice surprising him. "This isn't just my thing anymore, Marcus. You're in this with me. You understand what these kids need, because you are these kids. Your voice matters as much as mine does." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this responsibility that was being offered to him. "So we'd be practice dads for lots of kids?" "Something like that," LeBron said, smiling at the simplicity of how Marcus understood complex concepts. "We'd create a place where kids know that at least one adult is completely focused on them, at least for a few hours every day, where they know someone sees them and believes they matter, and we'd keep our promises to them," Marcus added, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them understanding that something significant had just shifted between them. They weren't just talking about their own relationship anymore, they were talking about changing how kids like them experience the world. But establishing that school, it nearly broke LeBron. What happened during the planning phase will shock you. November 2016, 5 months after that conversation, the I Promise School was consuming LeBron's life. 18-hour days in meetings with educators, architects, pouring millions into research. But he was still playing basketball, leading the Cavaliers, being a husband and father. The breaking point came against the Warriors. 4th quarter, tie game, and LeBron's mind wasn't on basketball. It was on Marcus, who had called crying. His foster placement was changing again. LeBron missed 2 crucial free throws, lost the game. As he walked off court, the criticism started. "He's distracted, maybe he should stick to basketball." That night, in the arena parking lot, LeBron called Marcus. What Marcus said would either save or destroy everything they were building. "Are you giving up on me?" Marcus asked. "Never," LeBron said, "but I'm scared I'm failing everyone." "My real dad was scared too," Marcus replied quietly. "That's why he left." "Are you going to leave too?" LeBron's response to that question, it would define not just his legacy, but the lives of thousands of children. Here's what he said. LeBron sat in that parking lot for 3 hours, talking to an 8-year-old who had just asked him the most important question of his life. "Marcus," he finally said, "I'm not your real dad, but I'm going to be something your real dad never was. I'm going to be here, even when I'm scared, even when I mess up, even when everyone tells me I should quit and just play basketball. Promise?" Marcus asked. "I promise. But Marcus, when this gets hard, and it's going to get really hard, I need you to remember that we're not just building a school, we're proving that kids like us can break the cycle." What LeBron didn't know was that Marcus was recording their conversation to listen to when the doubts crept in. That conversation lasted until 2:47 a.m. 3 years later, when the I Promise school opened, Marcus would play that recording for the first group of students. By then he was 11 and helping LeBron mentor other kids who were just like they had been. But the opening day of the I Promise school, what happened that morning would bring both of them to tears. July 30th, 2018, opening day of the I Promise school. Marcus Williams, now 11, stood at the podium in front of 240 third and fourth graders. Kids who looked just like him. Kids who understood abandonment. 2 years ago, Marcus began, I met someone who changed my life. Not because he was famous, but because he knew what it felt like to be scared he wasn't good enough to be someone's dad. LeBron stood in the back, trying not to cry. Mr. LeBron taught me something, Marcus continued. Being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about not leaving when things get hard. That's when Marcus said the words that would become the school's motto. We're all going to practice being the parents we never had. For ourselves. For each other. For the kids who come after us. The auditorium erupted. 240 children cheering for a boy proving their stories didn't have to end with abandonment. But the most powerful moment was still coming. When Marcus finished his speech, he did something nobody expected. Marcus walked off the podium and straight to LeBron. In front of 240 kids and news cameras, this 11-year-old looked up at one of the most famous athletes on earth and said, "Thank you for being my practice dad. I'm ready to be someone else's practice dad now." Then he hugged him. Not a quick hug. A real hug between a father and son who found each other when they both needed it most. The photo became one of the most shared images in social media history. LeBron knelt down. "You know what this means? You're not just a kid anymore. You're a leader." Marcus nodded seriously. "I know. I've been practicing." What Marcus did next, it would inspire a movement that spread across America. Within 6 months, something extraordinary started happening. I Promise school graduates began starting their own mentorship groups. Marcus started Promise Partners, pairing older students with younger ones. "It's like practice being a big brother," Marcus explained. "And when you get good at being a big brother, you're ready to be a dad someday." But the most incredible story was yet to come. In 2019, something happened that even LeBron couldn't have imagined. Marcus's biological father, absent for 7 years, saw the news coverage. He reached out. The phone call lasted 4 minutes. When his father finished explaining, Marcus said something that shocked everyone. "I forgive you, but I don't need you to be my dad anymore. I learned how to be a son from someone who learned how to be a father. We're good." But the story doesn't end there. What happened when LeBron found out about that phone call? Nobody could have predicted this reaction. When LeBron learned about Marcus's conversation with his biological father, he didn't feel anger or protectiveness. He felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Pure, overwhelming pride. "You handled that better than I would have," he told Marcus during one of their weekly check-ins. "I learned from the best," Marcus replied, grinning. "Plus, I had lots of practice." That's when LeBron realized that their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Marcus wasn't just learning how to overcome abandonment, he was teaching others how to do it. The kid who had been crying in section 127 3 years earlier was now a leader, a mentor, a living example of what was possible when someone refuses to let your story end with being left behind. But Marcus had one more lesson to teach LeBron, one that would fundamentally change how LeBron saw his own legacy. "You know what I figured out?" Marcus said during a visit to LeBron's house in 2020. He was 14 now, confident in a way that seemed impossible for someone who had experienced so much loss. "What's that?" LeBron asked. "You didn't save me," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "We saved each other." And that realization, it would lead to the most important decision of LeBron's entire career. 2021. After 17 seasons in the NBA, LeBron James made an announcement that shocked the basketball world. He wasn't retiring, but he was restructuring his entire approach to his career. "Basketball made me famous," he said at the press conference, "but being Marcus's practice dad taught me what I actually want to be remembered for." From that point forward, every business decision, every career move, every public statement would be filtered through one question: how does this help kids like Marcus? The I Promise school expanded. The mentorship programs multiplied. The practice parent concept spread to cities across America. Kids who had never had stable adult figures were learning to become the adults they had needed when they were younger. And Marcus became the youngest person ever to address the United Nations about child welfare and educational equity. Standing at that podium in New York, 18 years old and confident, Marcus looked out at representatives from 93 countries and said the words that would define his own legacy. "My name is Marcus Williams. I don't have a father, but I learned how to be a son. I learned from someone who didn't have a father either, but who learned how to be a parent. And now I'm here to tell you that we can end the cycle of abandonment, one practice relationship at a time. But the most incredible part of this story, it's still being written. What Marcus is doing now will shock you. Today, Marcus Williams is 22 years old, a senior at Ohio State University studying education and child psychology. But more importantly, he's the founder and executive director of Practice Families, a nationwide program that pairs adults who grew up without stable father figures with children who are currently navigating the foster care system. The program operates in 15 cities across America and has over 10,000 active participants. Children are learning what stability looks like from adults who understand instability intimately. Adults are learning how to nurture and guide from kids who desperately need nurturing and guidance. Everyone is practicing how to be the family they never had, how to keep promises in a world that taught them promises were just words. The program's headquarters are in Cleveland, just 3 miles from Quicken Loans Arena, where that championship celebration happened 6 years ago. The walls are covered with photos, not of celebrities or achievements, but of practice families, celebrating graduations, birthdays, first days of school, adoption finalizations, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the simple act of someone showing up consistently. LeBron, now 39 and still playing basketball at an elite level, visits the headquarters every month when he's in Cleveland. But when people ask him about his legacy, about what he wants to be remembered for, he doesn't talk about championships or records or MVP trophies gathering dust in his home. He talks about Marcus. He talks about the thousands of kids who are breaking cycles of abandonment because one crying child in Section 127 taught him what greatness actually looks like. People ask me what my greatest achievement is, LeBron said in a recent interview. It's not the championship, though that meant everything. It's not the scoring records or the accolades. It's watching Marcus teach a 7-year-old how to tie his shoes, knowing that 7-year-old will grow up and teach someone else. It's getting text messages from kids I've never met, telling me they kept their first job because someone in Practice Families taught them what showing up meant. The boy who saved his lunch money to see LeBron win a championship became the man who taught LeBron what winning actually means. But the most incredible part of this story isn't the school or the program or the thousands of lives changed. It's what happened on a quiet Tuesday evening last month when LeBron was visiting Marcus at the Practice Families headquarters. Marcus was working late, reviewing applications from adults who wanted to become practice parents, when LeBron found him in his office, the same office that used to be LeBron's, before Marcus had grown into the leader this movement needed. "You know what I figured out," Marcus said, looking up from a stack of applications. He was wearing a suit now, confident in a way that seemed impossible for someone who had experienced so much loss, but his smile was the same one LeBron remembered from that 8-year-old on the foster home steps. "What's that?" LeBron asked, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk, the same chair where nervous adults sat when they were interviewed to become practice parents. "You didn't save me," Marcus said matter-of-factly, organizing the applications with the careful precision he'd learned from years of his life being managed by caseworkers and social services. "I mean, you helped a lot, but you didn't save me." LeBron raised an eyebrow. "Oh really? Then what happened?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, LeBron could see both the 8-year-old who had cried in Section 127 and the 22-year-old who now ran a multi-million-dollar organization that was changing lives across America. "We saved each other," Marcus said simply. "You needed to learn how to be the dad you never had. I needed to learn how to be the son I thought I could never be. And then we both needed to learn how to teach other people that they could be the family they never had." He gestured toward the applications on his desk. "Every one of these people is scared they're not good enough, just like you were scared, just like I was scared, but they're applying anyway, because we showed them that being scared doesn't disqualify you from showing up, and that realization, it would lead to the most important decision of LeBron's entire career. Your story doesn't have to end with being left behind. Sometimes, the people who understand loss the best are the ones who can teach you how to build something beautiful from broken pieces. Sometimes, the greatest victories happen when nobody's keeping score. And sometimes, a crying child in the stands can see something in a champion's eyes that the champion can't see in himself. The capacity to be exactly what that child needs, precisely because he needed it too.